Let me introduce myself. My name is Amelia, and I've been keeping a secret for quite some time. To take advantage of this opportunity, I would like to introduce myself. Please listen to my story before judging me. Thank you in advance for your consideration. Regarding this particular recollection, I have been experiencing a tremendous deal of anxiety for quite some time. My husband coerced me into doing something which ultimately changed the course of my life. This situation has been ongoing for several years. My husband, William, and I had been married for nearly 10 years, and, like most couples, we had our fair share of positive and negative experiences. However, I had no idea this would happen. William was a man who loved other people, but as he grew older, he became more distant, controlling, and less affectionate. He changed throughout his life. I'm still not sure why everything happened so quickly. I've been aware of this recollection for a long time, and it's caused me anxiety. My husband forced me to accept responsibility for something in order to bring about a change in our lives. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just stress from my job, but I knew something was wrong on a deeper level. I tried to ignore it. One evening, William returned home from work with a strange energy emanating from him. He arrived home with this much energy. Despite the fact that he appeared to be in a particularly upbeat mood, the way he looked at me struck me as almost unsettling. I was about to finish washing the dishes when he made the customary request that I sit down for dinner. He made this request just as I was about to finish washing the dishes. Despite my awareness that this would not be a typical conversation, I agreed with him based on the serious tone he used. When I realized this, my heart rate increased dramatically. There is something I need to bring to your attention, and I believe he began to avoid looking at me. I'd like to bring this to your attention. He made a simple statement. They are coming over this weekend. Despite my inability to understand his words, I couldn't stop staring at him. Despite his seemingly serious expression, I couldn't tell if he was joking or if this was some sort of sick test. Suddenly, nausea overcame me, causing my stomach to twist. May I ask what you mean? There are two males. I used to ask questions in a barely audible voice. He stated that we would be spending the night with them, attempting to convey the impression that this was a common occurrence. I said, I couldn't find the right words, and I meant it. During our casual conversation, he brought up the subject of bringing two strangers into our home and marriage. The idea of bringing two strangers into our home and marriage not only filled me with nausea, but it also left me feeling betrayed. It's incomprehensible that he would propose something like this under any circumstances. My hands shook as I tried to understand what he was saying. I should point out that the person in question was not my husband. I discovered that the man I had promised to marry was not the one I was seeing. He had previously discussed it. Could you please explain why you are acting in such an illogical way, William? When I finally worked up the courage to say it, I said, This isn't us. Why would you even bother? After what seemed like an eternity, I was finally able to get the words out, and my voice was shaking with disbelief and rage. However, before I could finish my sentence, he blocked my path and interrupted me moments later. He informed Amelia, in a commanding tone, that this was happening right now. It's crucial for you to understand that this is something I desire and something we both need. Despite my strong feelings for JN, I couldn't understand why he was compelling me to participate in something so demeaning, something that appeared to have the potential to destroy everything we had built together. I found it difficult to believe what I was hearing. I told him I would not go through with it. I assumed that this would be the end of our relationship and that he would eventually reconsider and abandon the idea. On the other hand, over the next few days, it became clear that I had been completely mistaken. When I asked where John was, he gave me difficult-to-understand answers. John's distance from me grew. He rarely communicated with me unless it was about the plan, and he began returning home late. As the tension in our conversations increased, the love that had previously permeated our home gave way to a suffocating silence that pervaded the entire house. How did I get into this situation in the first place? Trapped, I felt isolated and confused. The sensation of dread had settled permanently in the center of my chest. Without regard for what I had to say, William appeared adamant that the meeting would proceed as planned. Despite having the option of leaving my bags packed and walking out the door, I chose not to do so. I was holding on to the man I thought I knew, and despite my reluctance to admit it, a part of me was still holding on to him. I hope this is just a phase we can get through together. As much as I didn't want to give up our life together, the thought of carrying out this plan was unbearable. We informed the men that the evening of Saturday had arrived much earlier than expected. William's supposed friends arrived promptly at 8 o'clock in the evening. Throughout the time I waited, I could tell they were looking at me, and the atmosphere was tense. I sat on the couch, clutching my hands tightly to prevent tears from streaming out of my eyes. I had no idea what their names were, and here they were, sitting in my living room, talking to my husband like old friends. I didn't know what their names were. I had no idea what their names were. When William leaned over to me, I felt an overwhelming desire to flee the house and never look up again. I wanted to see him for the first time. I was able to resist the urge, however. His hand resting on my knee prevented me from moving, and my body stubbornly resisted my mind's insistence that I get up and leave. After a brief pause, he whispered, "Amelia, it is time." John's hand exerted pressure on my knee, giving me a sense of control. In addition to my heart pounding in my chest, I had the impression that the room was drawing closer to me. I couldn't keep eye contact with him or the two men sitting on the other side of me. Something about the way he spoke caused me to pause briefly. For the first time in several days, the situation had devolved into desperation, and it extended beyond simply insisting on something. I could see a glimpse of vulnerability in his eyes. Providing him with a twisted fantasy was not the only issue. There was much more at stake. John repeated, "Amelia, please," in a low tone, as if pleading with her to comply with his request. His tone caused me to take a brief pause in our conversation. Control was the ultimate determining factor. Power was present, but I couldn't fully grasp something deeper. This didn't mean it was right. None of it appeared to be effective. To answer your question, William, I am unable to accomplish this. His face reflected his frustration as he sat back and let out a long, deep sigh. He also massaged his temples. Instead of conversing with me, he appeared to be muttering to himself, "You think I want this?" After what seemed like an eternity, I finally managed to lower my voice to a whisper and say, "This is not who we are. We are no longer the focal point of this. Instead, for the time being, it is about control. Amelia, do you understand what I'm working on? In fact, you're not." In an attempt to exact revenge, I summoned a small portion of my strength. "William, you're doing this to serve yourself. This no longer applies to us at this time." When I looked at his face, I thought I saw a flash of guilt, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. He stood up, clenched his jaw, and moved around the room like a man wandering aimlessly. He did this instead of carrying out his duties. I wanted to reach out to him and restore him to the person I knew him to be, but I had no idea how we had drifted apart, and I was unsure whether we would ever be able to reconnect. I wanted to return him to the person I knew in the past. During the long period of silence between us, I noticed one of the men, who we'll call him, walking around the room. Following the clearing of his throat, Marcus appeared to be aware of the tension around him. On the other hand, it appeared that he lacked patience. "If this isn't happening, we should probably leave," he said calmly but authoritatively. "If nothing is happening, we should probably leave." When I looked up at him for the first time, he was nothing like I expected. He acted honorably and remained calm throughout the situation. While I thought these men were predators, they were just people, making the situation even more confusing. I had formed this impression based on my own experiences. When Lou entered the room, I noticed that his demeanor was more sympathetic than I had expected, which surprised me. There was no doubt in my mind that these men were predators. I had already determined that. I remained seated because of the weight of everything. The years I had spent with William, the love we had once shared, and the hope that things would eventually return to normal. I had no desire to stay, nor did I want to be a part of whatever was developing while I was there. There was nothing I could do, and I felt suffocated by my indecision. I didn't know what to do. John then spoke, his tone subdued but unwavering. Amelia was the person in question. As soon as I heard those words, I felt like I was being punched in the gut. "If you leave, we're done." I looked at him in disbelief, trying to make sense of what he had just said. Because he had drawn a line in the sand, I had to decide which side of it I wanted to stand on. Despite the fact that tears began to form in my eyes, I managed them by blinking them away. I was adamant about not letting him witness my breakdown. To continue, he spoke in a steady but icy tone, saying, "I have given you everything. My only request is this, and I have loved and supported you throughout this process." My voice was the only thing audible above a whisper, and I declared, "This is manipulation." It was no longer a concern for me. I was incapable of doing so and had no intention of doing so. Despite his frustrated expression, I didn't care. I turned toward the door, fully expecting him to yell at me and grab me in an attempt to prevent me from leaving. Instead, I heard him mutter under his breath something along the lines of, "You'll regret this." Maybe I would. Maybe leaving was a mistake. I was surprised to hear him say this. At that moment, I realized I needed to leave the room. Neither JN nor anyone else could force me to do something I was uncomfortable with. I couldn't let this happen. As soon as I stepped outside, the crisp evening air hit my face, and I felt a strange combination of relief and heartbreak right then. As I walked down the street, my mind raced while my legs carried me. All I had left was a profound sense of betrayal and loss, with no answers to provide. After what seemed like hours of aimless wandering, I found myself standing in front of her house, which she shared with my best friend Sarah. I knocked on the door and prayed, hoping she was home. She saw my tear-stained face when she opened the door. She didn't ask any questions. Instead, she embraced me tightly and led me inside. To understand what happened, I stayed with Sarah. I felt as though someone had torn a piece of my being from me during that moment. Even though I missed William, I understood that I couldn't go back, as the damage was already irreparable. JN attempted to call me several times, leaving messages ranging from angry to apologetic for his actions. He left these voicemails in response to his attempts to reach me. His chaotic and erratic behavior hindered my ability to keep up with his fluctuating emotions. He eventually gave up trying to contact me after realizing I never returned his calls. I had never made a harder decision, but it was the best. The manipulation and coercion into situations that contradicted my beliefs made it impossible for me to remain in the relationship. After several months, I decided to file for divorce and began the process of gradually rebuilding my life. I understood that we couldn't salvage our marriage. While I still think about William and the life we could have had together if things had gone differently, I've realized that I've changed.